What if I told you that some houses in America are so terrifying that even experienced ghost hunters refuse to spend a single night inside? These aren't just scary stories. They're real places with documented murders, tragic histories, and chilling eyewitness reports that remain unexplained to this day. Tonight, we're counting down America's 12 most haunted houses even ghost hunters refuse to enter. And trust me, number 1 is far more disturbing than you think. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe for more true haunted stories every week. 1 Whaley House, San Diego, California, built in 1857. The first time I stood in front of the Whaley House, I remember thinking how peaceful it looked. Families were walking nearby, tourists were taking photos, and nothing about the old brick house suggested that it had earned the reputation of being one of America's most haunted homes. But the moment I stepped through the front door, the feeling changed. It wasn't fear. It was a strange silence that made me instinctively lower my voice, as if the house expected every visitor to show respect. The guide began explaining that before Thomas Whaley built this house in 1857, the land had already witnessed tragedy. In 1852, a man named James "Yankee Jim" Robinson was publicly executed on this very site. Historical records confirm the execution happened here, and ever since the Whaley family moved in, stories about heavy footsteps echoing through the house have never completely disappeared. Standing on those old wooden floors, I couldn't stop wondering how many people had asked themselves the same question: what if history never truly leaves a place? As I slowly walked upstairs, every room felt different. Sunlight entered through the windows, yet some corners somehow remained darker than the rest. Nothing moved in front of me, and I didn't see any ghost. Still, I had the uncomfortable feeling that someone was quietly standing just behind me. I turned around more than once, only to find an empty hallway. A few other visitors exchanged nervous smiles without saying a word. It was almost as if we were all trying to convince ourselves that what we were feeling had a perfectly normal explanation. For decades, visitors, employees, and paranormal investigators have reported hearing unexplained footsteps, seeing shadow-like figures, and sensing an unseen presence inside the Whaley house. None of these experiences have ever been scientifically proven, but they have been reported so consistently over the years that the house has become one of the most talked about haunted locations in America. That reputation alone is enough to make anyone pay closer attention to every sound. When I finally walked back outside, the warm California afternoon felt strangely comforting. I looked at the upstairs window one last time before leaving. It was completely empty, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone inside had quietly watched me from the moment I arrived until the second I walked away. Maybe it was only my imagination. Or maybe some houses never stop remembering the people who once called them home. 2 Myrtles Plantation, Street, Francisville, Louisiana, built in 1796, ***. The road leading to Myrtles Plantation was surrounded by ancient oak trees covered in Spanish moss. Even before I reached the front porch, the place felt different from anywhere else I had visited. It was quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. It felt like the house had been standing there for so long that every wall had absorbed the memories of the people who once lived inside. Looking at the mansion, it was hard to believe it had been there since 1796, surviving generations of families, wars, and tragedies. As the tour began, the guide focused first on the real history instead of the ghost stories. The plantation changed owners several times over the centuries, and members of different families experienced illness, loss, and unexpected deaths. Those events are well documented in historical records. Then the guide mentioned something that has kept the plantation famous for decades. Thousands of visitors have reported seeing unexplained figures in photographs, hearing footsteps on empty staircases, and noticing strange reflections inside the old mirrors. None of these experiences have ever been proven, but they have been shared by visitors from completely different backgrounds for many years. The room that caught my attention was the main parlor. An old mirror hung quietly on the wall, looking no different from any antique mirror I had seen before. Still, I found myself staring at it longer than I expected. I wasn't looking for a ghost. I was trying to understand why so many people believed something about that mirror was unusual. The longer I stood there, the more uncomfortable I became. It wasn't because I saw anything. It was because the room felt strangely heavy, as if history itself refused to leave. As I walked toward the staircase, I heard what sounded like slow footsteps somewhere above me. I stopped immediately. A few other visitors stopped too, all looking in the same direction. Seconds later, the guide calmly smiled and continued speaking as if nothing had happened. No one could say exactly what we had heard, and no one claimed it was paranormal. Yet that single moment stayed with me long after I left. Driving away from Myrtles Plantation, I kept looking at the old mansion through my rearview mirror until it disappeared behind the trees. I still don't know whether the strange feeling came from the reported hauntings or simply from standing inside one of America's oldest and most tragic historic homes. Sometimes, the real history of a place is unsettling enough to stay with you long after the visit is over. 3 Bobby Mackey's Music World, Wilder, Kentucky. Original building, 1850s, ***. When I arrived at Bobby Mackey's Music World, I wasn't expecting to feel nervous. From the outside, it looked like a normal country music bar where people came to enjoy live performances and forget about their daily lives. Cars filled the parking lot, music drifted through the entrance, and people were laughing. For a moment, I wondered how a place like this had become one of America's most talked about haunted locations. As I stepped inside, I learned that the building has a long and complicated history. Long before it became a music venue, the property was connected to a slaughterhouse in the 19th century, and the area is also linked to the well-known murder of Pearl Bryan in 1896, a real unsolved case that remains part of Kentucky's history. Over the years, these tragic events became deeply connected to local legends surrounding the building. Whether those legends are true is impossible to prove, but they continue to attract investigators from around the world. The deeper I walked into the building, the quieter everything became. The basement felt completely different from the lively dance floor upstairs. The air seemed colder, and every sound echoed through the empty walls. I stood there for several seconds without speaking. It wasn't because I had seen something. It was because I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone. I turned on my flashlight and looked around, but there was nothing except old brick walls and complete silence. Even so, I couldn't ignore the feeling that someone was standing just outside the edge of the light. The staff explained that for decades, visitors and paranormal investigators have reported hearing unexplained voices, footsteps, and strange knocks inside the basement. Some have even ended investigations early because they felt uncomfortable, although none of these experiences have ever been scientifically confirmed. Listening to those reports while standing in the same room made every small sound seem much louder than it really was. When I finally walked back upstairs, the music and conversations instantly made me feel normal again. Before leaving, I looked back toward the basement door one last time. Nothing unusual happened, yet that uneasy feeling stayed with me all the way home. Sometimes I think it was simply the power of the building's dark history. Other times, I wonder if some places hold on to their past more tightly than anyone realizes. For Lemp Mansion, St. Louis, Missouri, built in 1868, ***. I had read about the Lemp Mansion long before I visited St. Louis, but nothing prepared me for how different it felt in person. The house stood quietly on the street, its tall windows and old brick walls hiding a history that had shocked America for more than a century. Built in 1868, it was once the home of one of the wealthiest brewing families in the country. Looking at it from the outside, it was hard to believe that so much tragedy had happened behind those walls. The guide didn't begin with ghost stories. Instead, he told us about the Lemp family itself. Their brewery made them incredibly successful, but that success slowly turned into heartbreak. Historical records confirm that several members of the Lemp family died by suicide over different generations, including William Lemp Sr. in 1904 and William Lemp Jr. in 1922. Those tragedies are real, and they are the reason the mansion has carried such a dark reputation ever since. As I walked through the dining room and into the long hallway, I noticed something strange. Every room looked beautiful, yet the atmosphere felt unusually heavy. It wasn't the kind of fear you get from watching a horror movie. It felt more like standing inside a place where sadness had never completely disappeared. I caught myself slowing down without realizing it. Even the sound of my own footsteps seemed louder than normal, and for a moment, I honestly forgot there were other people walking behind me. The guide explained that many guests and paranormal investigators have reported hearing unexplained footsteps, doors opening by themselves, distant voices, and shadow-like figures inside the mansion. None of these reports have ever been scientifically confirmed, but they have continued for decades, making the Lemp Mansion one of America's most famous haunted destinations. As I reached the second floor, I suddenly heard what sounded like a door closing somewhere behind me. I turned immediately, expecting to see someone there, but the hallway was completely empty. When I finally stepped outside, I took one last look at the mansion before getting into my car. I couldn't honestly say I had seen a ghost, because I hadn't. But I also couldn't ignore the feeling I carried with me after leaving. Sometimes history leaves behind more than old photographs and newspaper headlines. Sometimes it leaves behind a silence that follows you long after you've walked away. 5. The Conjuring House, Harrisville, Rhode Island, built in 1736, ****. The drive to the Conjuring House felt longer than it actually was. As the busy roads disappeared behind me, narrow country roads and open fields surrounded the old farmhouse. When I finally stopped my car, I understood why this place had become one of America's most talked about haunted locations. Built in 1736, the house looked exactly like a piece of early American history, standing quietly in the middle of the countryside. It was beautiful, but there was something about its silence that immediately caught my attention. Before entering, I reminded myself of the real history. This is the farmhouse where the Perron family lived during the 1970s. Their experiences later inspired the Conjuring movie, but the real family has shared their own accounts for decades through interviews and books. Whether every paranormal claim is true remains debated, but the family's history with the house is well documented. Knowing that made every room feel far more personal than any horror film ever could. Inside, the wooden floors creaked with almost every step. Sunlight entered through the old windows, yet the house never felt completely bright. I paused inside one of the upstairs rooms and listened carefully. The entire house was silent, but I couldn't ignore the strange feeling that someone else was quietly standing nearby. I looked into every corner, expecting to see another visitor, but there was no one. It wasn't fear that made my heart beat faster. It was the uncomfortable feeling of being watched without knowing why. The guide explained that visitors and paranormal investigators have reported hearing unexplained footsteps, soft knocks on the walls, doors moving on their own, and sudden cold spots throughout the house. None of these experiences have been scientifically proven, but they continue to be reported by people who visit from around the world. Hearing those stories while standing inside the same rooms made it surprisingly difficult to dismiss every sound as simply an old house settling. When I finally walked back outside, the fresh air felt different. I turned around for one last look at the farmhouse before leaving. The windows reflected the evening sunlight, and everything appeared completely normal. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that the house had quietly observed every step I took from the moment I entered until the moment I left. Maybe it was only the power of history mixed with expectation. Or maybe some places hold on to their stories so tightly that every visitor becomes part of them, even if only for a few minutes. 6. Winchester Mystery House, San Jose, California, purchased in 1886, ****. The first thing that surprised me about the Winchester Mystery House wasn't how strange it looked. It was how enormous it really was. Photos had never captured its true size. Standing outside the mansion in San Jose, I realized this wasn't just another historic home. It was a maze built over nearly 4 decades by Sarah Winchester, the widow of the Winchester rifle heir. She purchased the property in 1886, and from that day until her death in 1922, construction almost never stopped. As I followed the tour through the endless hallways, every room seemed to raise more questions than answers. Staircases suddenly ended at ceilings. Doors opened into walls. Some doors even opened to empty space several feet above the ground. These unusual features are completely real and can still be seen today. Historians believe many of the changes were simply part of Sarah's constant remodeling projects, while local legends claim she designed the house to confuse spirits. No one knows for certain which explanation is true. The deeper I walked into the mansion, the easier it became to lose my sense of direction. Every hallway looked almost identical to the last one. At one point, I honestly couldn't remember which way the exit was. I stopped for a second and listened. The house was full of visitors, yet the hallway around me became strangely quiet. I thought I heard slow footsteps somewhere behind me. When I turned around, there was no one there. It was probably another group walking on a different floor, but in a house like this, even ordinary sounds make your imagination work overtime. Our guide explained that for many years, visitors and paranormal investigators have reported hearing unexplained footsteps, whispers, doors closing on their own, and shadow-like figures moving through empty hallways. None of these reports have ever been scientifically confirmed, but they continue to be shared by people who have explored the mansion from all over the world. Whether those experiences are caused by the house itself or by its mysterious design remains an open question. When I finally stepped outside, I looked back at the mansion one last time. The beautiful Victorian architecture seemed far less confusing from a distance. Yet one thought stayed with me all the way home. If I could become completely lost during a short guided tour, I couldn't imagine what it must have felt like to live inside that incredible house for nearly 40 years. Sometimes, the greatest mystery isn't whether the house is haunted. It's understanding the mind of the person who built it. 7 LaLaurie Mansion, New Orleans, Louisiana, built in 1832, ****. The streets of the French Quarter were full of music, tourists, and old buildings, but everything changed the moment I stopped in front of the LaLaurie Mansion. Built in 1832, it looked elegant from the outside, with beautiful balconies and tall windows. If I had not known its history, I probably would have walked past without giving it a second thought. But once I remembered what had happened inside those walls, the mansion no longer looked beautiful. It looked like a place carrying a burden that time had never erased. The guide didn't begin with ghost stories. He began with history. In 1834, a fire broke out inside the mansion, and when firefighters entered the upper floor, they discovered enslaved people who had been chained and brutally abused. Those horrifying discoveries were reported at the time and remain one of the darkest chapters in New Orleans history. Delphine LaLaurie fled the city before she could face justice, leaving behind a house that would forever be remembered for tragedy rather than wealth. Standing outside the mansion, I couldn't stop looking at the upper windows. The building is privately owned today, so I couldn't walk through its rooms, but even from the sidewalk, the place felt unusually quiet. Tourists around me spoke in low voices, almost without realizing it. I found myself doing the same. It wasn't because I believed I would see a ghost. It was because the real history of the house was disturbing enough to change the atmosphere completely. For decades, neighbors, visitors, and paranormal investigators have reported hearing unexplained voices, seeing shadow-like figures near the upper windows, and feeling an overwhelming sense of sadness around the property. None of these experiences have been scientifically proven, but the reports have continued for generations. Many investigators have described the mansion as emotionally overwhelming, saying the history alone makes it one of the most unsettling places they have ever visited. As I walked away, I looked back one final time. The balconies were empty, and the windows reflected the afternoon sun just like every other historic building in the French Quarter. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that this mansion was different. Maybe it wasn't because of ghosts at all. Maybe some places become unforgettable simply because the real events that happened there were so heartbreaking that the walls themselves seem to remember them. That thought stayed with me far longer than any ghost story ever could. 8 Villisca Axe Murder House, Villisca, Iowa, built in 1868, ****. The drive into the small town of Villisca felt almost too peaceful. Quiet streets, old houses, and friendly neighborhoods gave me no reason to expect that one of America's most disturbing crime scenes was waiting just ahead. When I finally stood in front of the Villisca Axe murder house, built in 1868, it looked like an ordinary white farmhouse. If I hadn't known its history, I would have thought it was just another historic home preserved from another era. The moment I stepped inside, the guide asked everyone to remember one date, June 10, 1912. That was the night when Josiah Moore, his wife Sarah, their 4 children, and 2 young guests were murdered inside the house with an axe. The crime shocked the entire country, and despite a lengthy investigation, no one was ever convicted. More than a century later, the case officially remains unsolved. Knowing those facts made every room feel far heavier than I expected. Walking through the bedrooms was the hardest part. The original layout has been carefully preserved, allowing visitors to see the house much as it appeared in 1912. I found myself staring at the small beds, trying to imagine how quickly an ordinary night turned into one of America's most infamous unsolved murders. The silence inside the house was overwhelming. No one in our group wanted to speak. Even the wooden floor seemed to creak at exactly the wrong moments, making everyone stop and look around. Over the years, visitors and paranormal investigators have reported hearing unexplained footsteps, children's voices, strange knocks, and seeing shadow-like figures inside the house. None of these experiences have ever been scientifically proven, but they continue to be shared by people from around the world. Whether those reports are connected to the tragic history or simply the power of suggestion is something no one has been able to answer with certainty. As I walked out the front door, I looked back at the quiet farmhouse one final time. Nothing about it appeared frightening anymore. Instead, it felt deeply sad. I realized that the most haunting part of Villisca isn't the ghost stories people tell today. It's the fact that the real tragedy happened, 8 innocent lives were lost, and after more than 100 years, no one can say with certainty who was responsible. Sometimes, the unanswered truth is far more terrifying than any ghost could ever be. 9 Sallie House, Atchison, Kansas, built in 1906, ****. The first thing I noticed about the Sallie house wasn't the house itself. It was how normal the neighborhood looked. Children were riding bicycles, cars passed quietly down the street, and nothing about the small brick home suggested that it had become one of America's most famous paranormal locations. Built in 1906, the house looked like countless other homes across Kansas. But its reputation had drawn investigators from around the world, and I wanted to understand why. As I stepped inside, the guide immediately separated history from legend. The house itself is real, and the reports connected to it are well documented by homeowners and paranormal investigators. During the early 1990s, former resident Tony Pickman publicly described waking up with unexplained scratches on his body and experiencing strange activity inside the home. Those reports helped make the Sallie house internationally famous. The story of a young girl named Sallie, however, remains part of local paranormal folklore and has never been historically verified. Walking through the small living room and narrow hallway, I expected something dramatic to happen. Instead, everything felt strangely ordinary. That was what made the experience so unsettling. The silence inside the house seemed heavier than it should have been. I paused for a moment near one of the bedrooms and heard what sounded like a soft tapping somewhere behind me. I turned around immediately, expecting another visitor, but the hallway was empty. It could have been the old house settling, yet the timing was enough to make every person in our group stop talking. 10 Franklin Castle, Cleveland, Ohio, built in 1881, ****. The first time I saw Franklin Castle, I understood why so many people stopped just to look at it. The dark stone walls, narrow towers, and Gothic windows made it feel more like a medieval castle than a family home. Built in 1881 by German immigrant Hannes Tiedemann, it still stands in Cleveland as one of the city's most recognizable landmarks. From the sidewalk, it looked magnificent. But the more I learned about its past, the less beautiful it seemed. The guide began with the documented history instead of the ghost stories. During the late 19th century, the Tiedemann family experienced several heartbreaking losses. Historical records confirm that multiple family members, including young children, died over the years due to illness and other causes. Those tragedies helped create countless rumors about the house. Over time, local legends grew even darker, adding stories that historians have never been able to verify. Standing in front of the building, I realized how easily real grief can become surrounded by mystery. As I walked through the old hallways, I noticed how quickly the atmosphere changed. The outside noises disappeared the moment the heavy door closed behind us. Every wooden floorboard echoed beneath my feet, and the long corridors seemed darker than they should have been, even during the afternoon. I paused near one of the staircases after hearing what sounded like slow footsteps above me. I waited for someone to appear, but no one did. A few seconds later, another visitor quietly admitted they had heard the exact same sound. For decades, neighbors, guests, and paranormal investigators have reported hearing unexplained footsteps, distant whispers, doors opening on their own, and seeing shadow-like figures near the upper floors. None of these experiences have ever been scientifically confirmed, but the reports have continued for generations. Whether those stories are caused by the castle's tragic history or by the power of expectation remains unknown, yet they continue to attract curious visitors from around the world. When I stepped back outside, the fresh air felt strangely different. I turned around for one final look at Franklin Castle before leaving. The stone walls stood silently against the evening sky, keeping their secrets exactly where they had been for more than a century. I never saw a ghost during my visit, but one thing became clear to me. Sometimes, a house doesn't need to prove it's haunted. Its real history is enough to leave you wondering long after you've walked away. Over the years, numerous visitors and paranormal investigators have reported hearing footsteps, children's laughter, unexplained whispers, and sudden cold spots inside the Sallie house. Some investigators have also claimed to experience scratches or unusual feelings during overnight investigations. None of these experiences have been scientifically proven, but they continue to be reported by different visitors, making the house one of the most discussed paranormal locations in the United States. As I stepped back outside into the afternoon sunlight, I looked over my shoulder one last time. The house appeared completely peaceful, just another family home on a quiet street. Yet I couldn't ignore the strange feeling I carried with me after leaving. Maybe it was simply the power of expectation. Or maybe some places become unforgettable because the stories surrounding them quietly stay with you long after you've gone home. 11 Lizzie Borden House, Fall River, Massachusetts, built in 1845, ****. I had visited many old historic homes before, but walking toward the Lizzie Borden house felt completely different. The neighborhood was quiet, and the house looked much smaller than I had imagined. Built in 1845, it seemed like an ordinary family home. If someone had shown me a photo without telling me its history, I would never have guessed that one of America's most famous unsolved murder cases happened inside those walls. The tour began with facts, not ghost stories. On the morning of August 4, 1892, Andrew Borden and his wife Abby Borden were brutally murdered inside the house with an axe. Their daughter, Lizzie Borden, was arrested and later put on trial. Although she was found not guilty, the case was never truly solved. More than 130 years later, people still debate what really happened inside that house. Standing in the same rooms where those events unfolded made the history feel far more real than anything I had ever read in a book. As I slowly walked upstairs, I noticed how incredibly quiet the house was. Every step on the old wooden staircase echoed through the hallway. I entered the guest bedroom where Abby Borden was found, and without realizing it, I stopped speaking altogether. The room was completely still. Nothing unusual happened, yet the silence itself felt unsettling. It wasn't fear. It was the weight of knowing that a real tragedy had taken place exactly where I was standing. The guide explained that many overnight guests and paranormal investigators have reported hearing unexplained footsteps, doors opening on their own, whispers in empty rooms, and sudden cold spots throughout the house. Some visitors have even claimed to see shadow-like figures moving through the upstairs hallway. None of these experiences have ever been scientifically proven, but they continue to be reported by people who spend the night there, making the house one of America's best-known paranormal destinations. When I finally walked back outside, I turned around for one last look at the front door. The house looked peaceful again, almost ordinary. But I couldn't stop thinking about one simple fact. The murders inside this home are real, the mystery remains unsolved, and every visitor leaves with the same unanswered question that has puzzled investigators since 1892. Sometimes, it isn't the ghost stories that stay with you. It's the truth that no one has ever been able to explain. 12 McRaven House, Vicksburg, Mississippi, built in 1797, ****. I arrived at McRaven House just before sunset, and the timing couldn't have been better. The fading light gave the old house an almost unreal appearance. Built in 1797, it is considered one of the oldest surviving homes in Mississippi. From the outside, it looked peaceful, but knowing it had witnessed more than 2 centuries of American history made every step toward the front door feel heavier than the last. The guide welcomed our group by explaining the house's real history first. McRaven wasn't made famous by a single tragedy. Instead, it became known because of the many different lives that passed through it. During the Civil War, the house served as a field hospital after the siege of Vicksburg in 1863. Wounded Confederate soldiers were treated inside its rooms, and some never survived their injuries. Historical records confirm the home's connection to the war, and standing inside those rooms made it easy to understand why so many visitors described the atmosphere as unforgettable. As I walked through the narrow hallway, I noticed how every room seemed to tell a different chapter of history. Antique furniture remained exactly where it had been placed decades ago, and the old wooden floors creaked beneath every step. I paused near one bedroom after hearing what sounded like a soft knock somewhere behind me. I turned around immediately, expecting another visitor, but the hallway was completely empty. No one spoke. For a few seconds, everyone in our group simply listened to the silence. The guide explained that many guests and paranormal investigators have reported hearing unexplained footsteps, quiet whispers, doors moving on their own, and seeing shadow-like figures near the old hospital rooms. None of these experiences have ever been scientifically confirmed, but similar reports have continued for many years. Whether those stories are connected to the house's long history or simply to the emotions people feel inside such an old building remains impossible to prove. When I finally stepped back onto the front porch, the evening air felt strangely comforting. I looked back at McRaven House one last time before leaving. The windows reflected the last light of the setting sun, and everything looked completely calm. Yet I couldn't stop thinking about the generations of people who had walked through those same doors before me. Maybe the greatest mystery isn't whether McRaven House is haunted. Maybe it's how a place can hold so much history that every visitor leaves believing they experienced something they still can't fully explain.